Don Williams again for the Institute of Sports and Spines. Today we're going to do a demonstration of how we do bike fits at Institute of Sports and Spines. Now there's many different systems you can use for getting your bike set up. Some bike stores do some very simple setups using plumb bobs and tape measures and rulers and things. Some places use some video assisted systems. Specialised uses their BG Fit or Body Geometry Fit. There's the Rudel system. There's the Bike Fit system, Pro Bike Fit system. So there's a number of different systems around and they all have their pros and cons. I tend to use a combination of Silicon Coach Pro 7 and high-speed video analysis in conjunction with clinical reasoning to decide what position we're going to put people on bikes. Now there are a whole bunch of different measurements and variables that you can find that are stated as the optimum position to put a cyclist. What it really boils down to is if you put someone who is very tight or inflexible or who has deficiencies or pain syndromes in certain positions on a bike, they will get a lot of pain. So often what would technically be the correct or optimal position isn't really optimal for that person because they're a human and they need a different position. For our bike ergometer, we use a Wahoo KICKR system. Now the Wahoo is relatively new to the market and it allows us to do bike fits from anything from a 24-inch bike through 26-inch mountain bikes, 700c road bikes, 27.5-inch mountain bikes, 29-inch road bikes and mountain bikes. The plus is with the KICKR, it will also adapt for different axles. So the axle length on a road bike is 130 mils, on a mountain bike it's 135 mils. We have adapters for both of those. We also have bolt-through adapters for those bikes that come out with bolt-through rear axles. The other plus is we can change the cassette on the drive side from 8, 9, 10 and 11 speed cassettes so that we can obviously work through a range of different systems from Shimano and SRAM, older systems, newer systems, etc. The thing that we use when we're doing our fits at Institute of Sports and Spines is this nifty little tool that we've made, which is a combination of a whole bunch of different squares, rulers and angle measurement devices. And the cool thing with this tool is that we can take the measurements of the bike for the seat height, the fore and aft measurements of the handlebars and stem and the seat and the relative heights of the stem to the seat, to the frame, etc. And we can then set this aside. We can take all the measurements off it, put it into their file, and then later on we can retake the measurements in the new position we've set them on, and if we need to revert back, it's a very quick and simple process we can do to return that. We can also use this to set our test bikes up, which we use for performance testing, to replicate people's normal training bike. So when they jump onto our test bike, it feels exactly the same as they do when they're on their normal training bike. I mentioned before, using the Wahoo KICKR is a really simple, adaptable system for a whole bunch of different bike types. So we simply take the wheel out of the frame, lay it aside, and then we put the bike onto the KICKR. And then we're ready to go with our analysis. It's a somewhat ugly setup that we use, but by using multiple light sources from multiple directions, getting as much light on the subject as possible allows us to use a very high frame rate on our capture when we're doing our recording. And this allows us to hold or capture images at very precise points to take measurements. This just gives you a look at some of our setup with our computer system and cameras. You can only see one of the cameras at present, but we use a multiple camera setup that allows us to capture the athlete or cyclist from two angles at once, normally from the rear and from the side. We use dial-in motion to capture the images in high def at high speed, and then we import that data into Silicon Coach Pro to analyse and measure the athlete. We do our analysis in Silicon Coach Pro so that we can capture the athlete under load. The angles that you'll get at the knees, hips and shoulders can change quite dramatically from a resting position to a loaded position to a high loaded position. So we prefer to catch them midway through their cycle, and that allows us to set their bike up relative to their movement, not relative to their static position. The other thing that we like to do, which is a great aspect of the Wahoo, is to analyse the cyclist for efficiency in their original position. We then reposition them, and then we will analyse them in their new position. We should show an improvement in efficiency for their cycling technique. And we can give this to them in a report along with all the rest of their readings and settings. This gives you a brief look at our analysis of the angles of a cyclist. Obviously we've frozen the frame there just to give you a demonstration of angles. There's a lot of talk and discussion over the use of the Rudel system recently and looking at their accuracy of their sensor. Now, certainly not negating that their sensors may be accurate to within the millimetre, the position or placement of those sensors brings the same error into the equation that you would get from normal measurements. And my argument is when you get a clinician with many years of experience in palpation, their ability to palpate and get accurate ideas of the different bony prominences probably supersedes the sensitivity of the Rudel system. In saying that, what I mean is that they may not be accurate in where they place the sensor, so therefore the accuracy of the system is somewhat flawed. And on having some discussions with some other particularly experienced and well recognised and respected bike fitters, they view that their clinical judgment and experience in the system of fitting bikes is more important than the accuracy of the system, because you might get an angle at 131 degrees versus 130 degrees, and that may or may not be relevant to why they're getting knee pain. When we do our bike fits at Institute of Sports and Spines, we start with gait analysis on the treadmill with people in their joggers or sports shoes. We also look at them in bare feet and we take some measurements and assess what their feet do biomechanically. When we start looking at the bike position, we start with the pedals and shoes. We look at the cleat system, the position of the shoes, the position of the cleat, and whether this suits or correlates with what their foot does naturally on the treadmill and in their normal walking pattern. We also look at the rear view on the bike setup as well, and that allows us to set the foot in the shoe so that we have the optimum start position for developing effective power. We also look at the seat height, the position of the saddle, the fore and aft position of the rails. We look at the length of the stem, the height of the stem, the height of the stack, the width of the bars, the position of the bars, the relative position of the bars to the seat as far as height, reach, etc. goes. We also look at frame position and whether the general bike setup suits the person. We also like to look at the intended use of the bike, because when we're looking at someone for a mountain bike setup versus a road bike setup versus a triathlon setup versus the touring bike setup, they're all somewhat different. So we want to make sure that we tailor the bike setup and position to what the effective use is. So that concludes our discussion today on how we do bike fit-ups at Institute of Sports and Spines.